O le tātou pua inga whalawa I tele nā samwhaiu nā whaalia I le tātou ngangana Samoa. Moving along, we've come to our first speaker for today. Vai Malimalo, Dr. Michael Fusi Lingalinga is the Assistant Professor and Program Lead of Pacific Island Studies at Brigham Young University in Hawaii. He instructs courses on peace and conflict in the Pacific, framing the cultures of the Oceania and environmental issues and resource management. Outside of academics, Dr. Lingalinga worked as a senior advisor for the Government Central of Dispute Resolution Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment for the New Zealand government. Vai Malimalo is a Samoan New Zealand born. His research interests are family and domestic violence in the Pacific and the global Pacific diaspora. He also specializes in peace and conflict issues impacting the Pacific region. Dr. Lingalinga hails from the villages of Salimoa and Mutiatele, Samoa. He is married to Fa'alima Lingalinga and are parents to two children, Joni and Licham. Dr. Lingalinga, Dr. Michael Fusi Lingalinga, if you're familiar with Lingalinga's funeral services, then you can connect that directly to Vai Malimalo, Dr. Michael Fusi Lingalinga. Thank you, Doctor, for joining us. It is so good to see you. It is so good to see you. It's been like forever.
Malo.
We realize what to wai le o faisi toi le tito tato taimi. So o lo mawa pea la ua wanoa e wha umai pea le wha o ngā i pea ato lau taimi le na tu inatu. So that means you might go a little bit over, but yeah, don't try and cut it down because we want to hear from you, Doc.
They're fine. Let me just quickly jump on and share my screen. See if everyone can see this. Can everyone see the slides?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, mumulavon vakulfa fkaimur fa malo le el kulenga ya mission malu o le asosita wa fala konga ka wa o fakulo ku foi kulanga fa lupe ya pa ya fa la kum pe fa ka le o lava mai ni kula ka ya vera le fa ko va mole kulanga fa fkai o ngi ya ngore le pe ona fa so atu ma swalo pule foi ni siom tapu taua ya misi foi ni vai ngole or tayao. I'm grateful again for this opportunity to share some thoughts. I thought when I looked at the agenda to kind of maybe take a bit of a tangent and speak on some of the work that I do in the family violence space. I'm an accredited mediator in New Zealand and Australia, especially in the family domestic violence space, where they get in mediators to kind of negotiate spaces between parents who may be separating and the involvement of children and those sort of things. And I wanted to kind of introduce you to some of the frameworks that I've been developing over the past sort of 6-7 years that's been used in the New Zealand government in this particular space. So in terms of the overview for today, we'll look at sort of the philosophies that's embedded in the organization that I created, which is HIVA, Alternative Dispute Resolution, and really just looking at how if we are able to conceptualize words within these spaces, it can be, even though family violence is generally considered a very traumatic space, but if we use the right words and they're very intentional in these spaces, we can actually really transform a lot of these experiences. So hence why I wanted to focus on the importance of words, in these spaces. Then I wanted to kind of introduce you to some of the frameworks that we use. So one of the frameworks is the Talanoa framework, but from a Hiva's perspective, I introduce you to the Malu and Nalu framework. And sorry, this is a bit of a typo, but it's supposed to be Talanoa Moeva. And these are sort of the languagings that we use in our spaces, especially in the work that we do in New Zealand within the family violence space. And if there's any questions, feel free to let me know in the chat or anything like that. I'm more than happy to slow down. Apologies for the thick New Zealand accent. I've been in the United States for such a long time, but I still can't get rid of it. So if there's words that doesn't sound the way it should sound, just please let me know. Don't judge me. I'll try to do my best. So Hiva was established about 5 years ago, and it's myself and a friend of mine, Helena Kaho. She's Tongan. She's a law professor at the University of Auckland, but now she's one of the primary mediators for the for the New Zealand government. And we saw that there was a huge gap when a lot of our Pacific families were getting into some disputes, especially around the family violence space. There wasn't a languaging to enable them to advocate their needs. And so we created this company to kind of address that space. We do a lot of cultural competency work within family violence and dispute resolution. And I just wanted to so Hiva in Tonga means 9, and the thinking came around this particular 9-dot problem. And I think some of us have done it before, and basically the whole gist of this problem is that you're supposed to connect all the 9 dots with 4 consecutive lines without taking your pen off, right? I won't get you to do it now, but if you have time, try and do it. The only way to satisfy this particular problem is that if your pen goes outside of the 9 dots. Yeah, and a lot of times when we look at this 9-dot problem, we are solely focused on the 9 dots. But we neglect that solutions can actually exist outside of the problem as well. And so hence the birth of the whole construct around Hiva, which is embedded around this Pan-Pacific understanding of Va, and we'll talk about that. So we get into talk about the law of Hiva. And I think within these particular organizations, and we had the first speaker who talked about the importance of legislation. When we talk about the law of Hiva, those 9 dots, it's really important that we as Pacific Islanders and Samoans in the space understand the legislation, understand the languaging that's in the legislation, because the more that we understand the languaging in the legislation, the more we are able to help our people. Now, I don't want to get into much of that, but we also need to be brave enough to go outside of these structures and these institutions, because a lot of our people who are struggling within these particular spaces exist outside of the 9 dots. So in doing so, we as practitioners, that are in this space, we need to be brave enough to kind of navigate outside and inside of these 9 dots. Hence, the understanding of the interface between the law and law. So I can't say it with an American accent. LAW and LORE. We need to kind of embrace sort of this navigation between those 2 spaces. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about, especially in this space of family violence, and to get to the depth, there's one word that can mean so many different things. But my perspective is the reason why we don't have a lot of words to articulate these issues is because prior to the arrival of Christianity, we didn't have these issues, because our culture and our environment at the time didn't have these problems. And another thing we need to consider is that many of our words, there's a lot of deep meanings associated with it. So one of the things that I'm trying to do in my particular space is to provide more languaging so it does not camouflage the severity of the issues that are associated with family and domestic violence. Um, the title of the presentation was "A Word Fitly Spoken," and it's based on one of my favorite proverbial expressions from the Bible, and it's in Proverbs chapter 25 verse 11 to 13, which talks about a word fitly spoken is like apples of gold and pitchers of silver. And I wanted to talk a little bit about this because it frames my entire presentation for this morning. What this proverb is talking about is that, silver is that material is very, it's expensive. Yeah, it's a very expensive material. But when you add gold to it, its value increases substantially. Yeah. So this is the beauty about using the right words in the right spaces, because you can transform any sort of situation. And I just wanted to go into this next slide. And what I've written here was, I just want to read it word for word, because it talks about a word fitly spoken comes from the right heart. It's a heart consumed by love and faith. It is a word that meets the needs of the day. It is a word that is carefully adjusted to the right force, the right emotions, and the right content. An adjective is selected for its appropriateness, and the verb is taken for its gentle persuasion. All of it must reflect truth. No slander or pandering is allowed. At times, it could be a word of correction that directs itself to a particular sin that entangles a brother. So what this talks about that, even during Gemi Fenka, these traumatic experiences, if we are competent in using the right words in the right spaces, we can have shift in the narrative. Yeah. But that's prefaced on our ability to understand and articulate what the right words and right circumstances. In Hiva, we teach that healing starts from a place of hurt. And so a lot of the times we spend a lot of our time and efforts in the past where the victims have been traumatized. That's very different from a Western's perspective, where we don't spend a lot of time in the past because it's traumatic. It can re-traumatize the victim. However, from a Hiva's perspective in our organizations, we cannot move forward until we embrace and understand the constructs of the past. And I'll speak a little bit to that in some of the frameworks. So one of the reasons why it's because, there's so many things that have framed our languaging. Social media is a huge thing. We just say hi and bye. And I think as a society, even within our Samoan culture, we've lost the ability to really speak to each other at a person-to-person level. A lot of our socioeconomics, our lived experiences, the media and so many other sort of platforms has taken away that ability for us to be orators. And that's something that we should be proud of. Traditionally, we are orators, we're storytellers, but we've changed that narrative. Yeah. And as a consequence of that, when we get into these very traumatic spaces and we try to help, we recycle the same verbiage. Yeah. The same sort of words. But what I'm trying to talk about today is we need a cohort of words that we can use at the right time, at the right places to transform the discussions, even from a very traumatic space that is created by family and domestic violence. So I wanted to introduce you. I'm talking to the converted, but in Hiva, we break down Talanoa in a very different way. Obviously, it's a Pan-Pacific word that's framed around to talk, to discuss, to have a conversation, and so forth. But in Hiva, we talk about Talanoa in a very different way. The first thing we do, we break down the word because it has so many meanings. The first word I want you to consider in Talanoa is the word ta. Yeah, it's collective in purpose. It implies that we are doing things together. And a lot of the times when we have talanoa, it's between me and you. The word is actually embedded in our greeting word ta lofa, kako wofa kashi, lofa, right? But we never think that there's this corresponding message that when we say ta lofa to someone, that there's this implication that collectively we're actually going to do something, right? We're actually going to show some love or provide some sort of love in these particular spaces. So one of the things that we talk about in Talanoa, if you look at the last sort of bullet point, the concept of ta shifts the mindset by inviting parties to collectively work together. And so one of the invitations that we talk about is to be collective in mind, not just between the victim and so forth for you as a service provider, but that really sort of holistic approach. The other part of Talanoa that we talk about is twofold. It's ala, which means like a path, or ala, right, which means to be awakened. And so part of Talanoa is that you need to be awake to the process, right? You need to understand, you need to be focused, you need to be well in tuned about your immediate and your extended environments, and be aware of those issues that are around you. I've been in so many different spaces where victims are pouring out their hearts and all we're focusing about is process. The reality is the process will take care of itself because we're dealing with people. If we help our people, the people will help the process. And Allah now enables us to be awakened or to be mindful of that particular process. The other part that we talk about Talanoa is the word tala, which means to untie. Yeah. And part of Talanoa is this whole sort of, we kind of refer to when parties come to us, especially in family violence, there's this sense of entanglement. Yeah. And it's our role as practitioners in this space to disentangle their entanglement, if that makes sense. And so through our stories, right, through our words, we use this as a powerful tool to tatala, le nono tanga, tatala le nono kanga, through our words and our talanoa and our stories. So part of talanoa is to untie the narratives. The other part of talanoa is noa, which comes from the Samoan word enonoa, right? And so one of a part of the process of talanoa is to tie and untie those narratives. In the Hawaiian culture, it also means freedom. In the Maori culture, it means freedom. And so basically through our narratives, through the tying and untying of our narratives, we are literally freeing the victims from this entanglement. And so it allows us to really be mindful of where they are, how they're being stuck in this situation. And it's our role as practitioners through our words to try and get this disentanglement as much as possible. So the talanoa in the family violence space, especially with the modules that we use in the Hiva training, is literally this process of tying in, untying narratives through their stories. And that's what we do. We teach practitioners of the skills that are needed to tie and untie narratives. Now, the opposite of talanoa, and this is the concept that we've designed in Hiva, is noa tala. So here, once this is our opportunity to shift the discussions from where they are, from being in the past, and shifting it to being present and future focused. And the way that we do that is to tie it or nonoa it to some context. And this is what the whole noa tala process is all about. We do this by this whole construct of the weft and the warp, which is basically how materials are designed. And if you look at the warp, that is the piece of the material that goes up and down. It doesn't change. It provides structure. It provides the strength of the material. So ele masai ngofie. And then the weft is the part of the material that goes from left to right. It provides, it enables the material to be stretched. It enables it to sit properly on your body. And so what we do in the noa tala framework is we actually teach participants what these sort of words are. What are the warp words? What are these words that do not change, that's embedded in our values and belief systems as Samoans, right? Or as we kind of refer to. And then what are the weft words? What are the words that we need to do to weave through some of these discussions that a lot of our victims have and intend to have as part of their sharing their traumatic stories. So often we talk about tapu, and because of time, I didn't really want to get into this, but that space, if it's even from a traumatic sense, in Hiva, we teach that it is a very sacred space because there's parties that are involved. And the tala noa and no tala process enables us to navigate through those tapu issues, those really sensitive issues. And we talk about transitioning from tapu pongisa to tapu mana malama. It's still sacred. It still needs to be treated with clarity and with carefulness, but we need to share light. And we all know that it only takes a little bit of light to penetrate the darkness. So part of this module or this part of the training is we teach this particular skill set to negotiate the difference between tapu māmalama to tapu pongisa. There's this philosophy that goes around that, you know, a lot of our communication is body language, and there's a lot of truth to that. But in the Samoan space, a lot of our communication comes from the way we speak. Yeah. And so tala noa no tala bridges that communications between the victims, the practitioners, or you know, as an organization, with a lot of the work that you're doing in this space, it is the languaging, right? It's the words that we use to try and unpack and to shift those mindsets between a place of hurt to a place of healing. Then we go into talk about this whole construct of talanoa moi va. I've talked a little bit about talanoa, but this whole concept of moi is such an important part in our Samoan culture. One of my favorite quotes about moi is from former head of state Tupua Tamasese, and he talks about the difference between ko wha mare moi and how this is associated with our, you know, the high chiefs and our orators, our talking chiefs, and the importance of dreaming, that when they go to sleep, they just don't sleep and don't think about things. Their minds are constantly thinking about what lays ahead, what happened in the past, and how do you negotiate those things. And he talks about this moe manatu natu. And I think this is a really important part, because when we go into these spaces, a lot of the times, because it's process driven, e lea ma se mawhawhaunga roko e aru ai whongare I re kemire komo whai e whaile process. But this invites us, in terms of our talanoa, in terms of understanding the relational space, that we literally need to think about it. We need to kind of dream. We need to have deep thought. Yeah, we need to ponder. And that requires a lot of preparation. And so when we think about moi is the conduit or the bridge that that marries the whole construct of talanoa and va, right? It bridges that gap. And I'll talk a little bit about that in the next couple of slides. So when we think about talanoa in this space, talanoa is the topic, moi is the wisdom, and we talk about custodianship. And moi comes from the victim. It also comes from the offender. It also comes from the practitioners who are trying to help the space. And then va is the space that we try to negotiate these sort of three ideologies or these three ways of thinking. The whole purpose of talanoa moi va is to achieve harmony. And a lot of the times this whole construct of harmony tends to be romanticized. When I think of harmony, I think of a choir, how everyone is singing all of these different notes, and everyone has one intention in mind, is to sing a beautiful song, a hymn, or so forth. And so harmony is not achieved in our similarities, it's actually achieved in our differences. And the whole process of talanoa, no tala, talanoa moi va, embraces our differences and enables us to kind of think of ways that we can look at our similarities through our differences. And the next couple of frameworks that I would just want to quickly talk to you, because just within the interest of time, allows us to kind of negotiate that. And so one of the things that I wanted to introduce you is just one framework that we're using in the family violence space, and that's the malu framework. And as you know, the malu is such an important part. It is of our culture. It's afforded to our Tamaitai Samoa. There's this one motif that signifies and identifies as the malu, and that's this particular diamond motif. It's situated purposely and intently behind the knee, and on top of the marulima, on top of the palms. And it's done there for a very important reason. Yeah. Um, One of the main roles of women prior to the arrival of Christianity, they were commonly referred to as ola koe e kaungapa male whamarungo o ainga. And my understanding through, talking to a lot of chiefs and orators and custodians of our knowledge is that the reason why the motif is actually situated at the back of the knee, if mangaku ia ka ko, not necessarily the woman, that harmony and peace can only be achieved on bended knee. And so obviously this part of the knee is where the knee bends. If koe mangaku mawhawhangur ka ko mawhawhau, ale ka ua roko maulalo. And I think it's a beautiful, beautiful part of this maru design, that the motif is situated at the back of the knee. It is the same sort of construct where the maru design is actually on the top of the hands. And there's a proverbial expression in Samoa, even here in Hawaii, that talks about that we do not serve as a people. We don't serve facing our palms facing up, because it implies that all we want is to receive. But in our Samoan worldviews, we always face our palms down because it intends that we're going to do some work. And part of peace building, part of ensuring that there's reconciliation and peace, is doing a lot of work. And so having the malu motif on top of the hands, it reminds us that and be prepared to do a lot of hard work. And so the malu framework was created out of this understanding. So the acronym is as follows. The importance, M is mata, eyes, the importance of seeing eyes to eyes. A is ala, is to be awakened. L is leo, voice, and U is to we be inquire, or to go through this particular process. So I just want to spend a couple of minutes just unpacking this particular framework. When we talk about mata, it's really important in the family violence space that as practitioners, and even myself, we need to come down to the level of equilibrium. Mata. And that's why, it's important, like for a lot of the times growing up, when mum and dad used to talk to me, we'll be sitting on the floor, because it forces us to have even eyes. And so a lot of this, the reasons why we have mata is to see the things that are known and not known. And your responsibility as a practitioner is to bring those things to light. And how do you do this? Well, you make sure that you understand that there's a difference between seeing, there's a difference between looking, and there's a difference between watching. Now, we go down in the Hiva framework and unpack these three different things. But what I want to sort of invite you to consider is that mata is not just seeing things. It's actually observing, right? Looking, and then watching. Those are three very different sort of skill sets. And as a consequence of that, you can be able to understand what the situations or the issues that are in front of you. Allah, to be aware. We talk about the awareness of boundaries and how boundaries exist and why do they exist. In the Hiva ADR framework, we talk about 9 different boundaries. I'm not going to talk about the 9 boundaries, but if you're interested, more than happy to talk to you about this particular space. Because you understand those boundaries and where you can and cannot go, you are then you're more able to kind of negotiate those spaces through the understanding of Va. Now you know where you can and cannot go because you have an understanding of those boundaries. Allah is to be awakened, and we talk about these Vas, your immediate, extended, wider, and your spiritual Vas, and how do you navigate those things collectively. So what's your Va, your positionality as a practitioner, and then what are the parties' positionalities as the victim, might be the legislator, the law, and those sort of things, and how do we navigate those different spaces together? So that's Allah, pathway. We talked a lot about this prior, and I think the previous presenter did an amazing job of understanding the importance of legislation. We as practitioners also need to understand that there's a process in place. And in order for us to help our people, we need to be experts of the process so that we know which aspects of the legislation, the law, or within your organizations, how we can help these people. So we need to be very mindful of that. When we talk about the FDR space, we've designed a FDR process to help victims of violence. And we spend a lot of our time in the past to help them understand the present and help them to kind of move forward. And I'll talk a little bit about this in the next couple of slides. We prioritize people. Yeah. Process is very important, but process will look after itself if we look after our people. And a lot of the times, a lot of our people, especially in the Samoan space, get so caught up in the process that we tend to forget that. Look, at the end of the day, it's people that we're dealing with, and we need to help them through that particular situation. Leo is voice, and again, based on this presentation, there's a huge emphasis on languaging. And we talk about ta and va. Ta is as you know, it comes from the sounds from the tatau, and va is rhythm is the spaces that exist. And in this particular situation, we teach participants that every situation has a languaging. So, and we need to be fluent speakers in the language of hurt, in the language of abuse, in the language of mistrust. What does rape look like? What does incest look like? What are those languages that are associated with some of these very serious issues? And so instead of making it all sound the same or singing in unison where there's no difference, we need to be very conscious of that every single environment and context have its associate languaging. And so Ta and Va ensures that whenever a situation comes, we know exactly what people are talking about. We talked about languaging, and I just wanted to talk about ui, which is to inquire, and we inquire using the process of tala noa and noa tala. It's through our stories. Be very inquisitive, and then we talk about the difference between inquire and inquire, and these are two very different skill sets that you guys as practitioners within the family violence space need to be consciously aware of. And that's a skill set that we teach through the tala noa and noa tala. So we have 4 frameworks. The first one is the tala noa framework that I kind of touched on. We talked a little bit about the malu framework and how that can help practitioners navigate. It's that mindset that you need to have when you're talking to victims. The other framework that we use is the naru framework, meaning waves. Yeah. How do we navigate through these processes, through when the victims come in, to when we help them, to when they go back into the communities? What does this process look like? And we talk about the importance of navigation, adaptation, location, and understanding. Then we have this other framework of Talanoa Moiva, which actually enables us to kind of ensure that those particular spaces are done in a way where we are critically thinking, we understand, we plan, we prepare, that there's a lot of thought that goes into the process. And so it is very important for us to get the languaging right. And I'll send these slides to Jennifer, and I'll also send a report that I did for the people out in the who created the power and control wheel, and they asked me to do a translation job for them. And one of the concerns that we had was how many of the Samoan words used previously camouflaged the reality of the seriousness of a lot of these issues. And so the report that I did was based on a methodology called back translation, where you use a Samoan word, you translate it in English, and then you translate the English word back into Samoan. And then you kind of examine the differences. What we saw is that a lot of the words that we used, and so obviously there's a lot of different words in the footnoting so that people can understand the words in these very different spaces. And so just to conclude, words are such a powerful tool. It is very important for us as practitioners in this space to understand very specifically and clearly the words that are associated with the industry or with this particular sense of helpfulness that we are in right now. The word fitly spoken is very important because the right words can literally transform lives. I've seen it in my space when I've worked with family victims of domestic violence. And I hope that it is something that you guys as practitioners there in American Samoa, wherever you are chiming in online, can implement and use in your respective spaces. If there's any questions, I'm not quite sure if there's any questions coming through the chat. I'm more than happy to help, but this is something for us to consider. There's so many other things and tools that we can embrace, and this is just one tool in the toolkit. So yeah, thank you for the time. Thank you for the opportunity to be able to contribute to the space. If there's anything that I can do to help in your respective spaces moving forward, please let me know. And thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you, Doc, for that that informative presentation. That was a lot of information. I always, let me just say this, I always pride myself in being fluent in the Samoan language. And I know a lot of people in this field here in American Samoa are not well versed in the Samoan in the Samoan language, especially with the work that we do. But wow, listening to all that information, yeah, I feel like I'm back in the first grade or the first class where you're learning Samoan. You're learning the Samoan language with everything, how you broke down Talanoa. It makes sense. Ta, you and me, right? It's not just myself. It's not just me, myself, and I. Ta means you and I, me and someone else. I love how you broke down talofa, and how when we say talofa, it's welcome, and when it's ta fa'adia lealofa, ta alulufa. Lore of Hiva, the lore of Hiva. Need to go outside. It's like when they say outside of the box. Let's think outside of the box, because that sometimes that works, right? When we're all like just struggling inside in our old traditional ways and so forth, and thinking outside of the box can help. That makes sense. Using the right words in the right spaces. We need to be experts of the process. Fitly spoken. We have here a great presentation and wealth of information, Dr. Lingalinga, coming from our local Department of Health and Human and Social Services. Sorry. We also, Jennifer is saying, you mentioned making a cohort of words. We know that there are people who do transliteral translations of word. How would you suggest developing the cohort of words?
So that's one of the biggest issues. I appreciate the question. It's a issue that I'm wrestling with every single day, and the main thing is that the words that we use do not take away from the severity of the issues that are associated with the victim. So I honestly don't care if it's in Samoan, if it's in Tongan, or if it's in Hawaiian or Portuguese, right? We need to be victim focused, and we need to kind of restore whatever was taken away from them, their dignity, their respect, and those sort of things. And so a lot of the times I say, to start the conversations. Then we can dress whatever language that we have in the Samoan culture around. So, for example, the word that I always hear with rape is whamariskengi. If you were to literally translate that, whamarosi means to strengthen. It means to provide support, right? And then obviously, tēnei is tamaitai. Rape and to strengthen are very different. Very different, right? It actually reinforces and empowers the offender, not the victim, right? And so when I think about our language, and I'll just leave with this, you guys, for this to think about. Our greeting word and the way that we say goodbye has so much relevance in our process. We think of the word rofa, right? As I was saying, it is collective in purpose. It implies that we cannot do things in this life on your own, right? e kongo o whakasi, pulpulin whakasi, so au ka au whakasi. But then when we think about the way that we say goodbye, tō whā soi fua. I just finished talking about the word about tō whā, right? That's the word that we give to our high chiefs when we say, or are you going to sleep? Yeah, it's a very unique word that's afforded to them, but it's not like sleep where you knock out. E moe mangaku. That means that you're going to go, there's an intention, there's a purpose that you're going to seek dreams, seek revelations for the next day. And then tō whā soifua is our life. So what you're saying when you're saying goodbye is, I'm actually going to go and start thinking about what your life is going to look like the next time I'm going to say tā alofa. And so this is where I feel like as a society, as a Samoan collective society, we don't have to go looking for any other words. O lei lava mako koe upu re ka kouanga ngu to find solutions to our own problems instead of using English words, right? Because I was always taught by my parents, there's only two important things when you visit someone's house. It's the way you enter the house and the way you leave the house. And that's embedded on our greeting and farewell words, right? If we are actually practicing that. So for me, just to kind of recircle back, if we are using words to camouflage the severity of the issue that's associated with family violence, then don't use those words. Yeah, that's not a word that's fitly spoken. We use whatever words to amplify and empower and restore value and beliefs to our victims who were traumatized in the space. It gotta fit, there's a time and place for words, even in a very traumatic place. So I don't want us to go shopping around for other words. Yes, getting you upu kako, e ongi upu samu, ai esere mako o fie marero loko upu, that we can learn from. So, that's my thing. That I'm very, as you can see, I'm very passionate about this. If there's anything that I can do to help in these spaces with these frameworks, please let me know. I'm more than happy to help out. So again, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Whaftaitele. O whionga ia vai malmalo. Lady Fomai, ia Michael. Fusi ringalinga. Molana saunoanga, malana whasoa. Tusai fo'i maletato mafutanga ia. So I just wanted to mention, we also have more comments on social media, on Facebook. We have agreed using our Samoan words brings so much depth and meaning. Peona saunoa ai le sunga leli fomai. Le tā ua tātou ngangana, ma le loloto fo'i o vinga o tātou upu, ele o nge upu tātou Samoa o lo. Whamsoloi upu i le tātou ngangana, e te tau lava o na tātou whaonga inu. Awesome job, Dr. Linga. Whaftai atu lau sungai le li fo mai, tātou toi whenua i stai mo mea umalo whapena ona ngalue ai a wale tau mawhainga mo se maua ole se toa whimalie, toa while mo, se toa manga mo tātou tangata o loo whapena foi ona a whia i tūlango sa wanga o loo iai nei ona po ia mese foi o le Pasifika talo sia o whaonga tatau ia nei upu te tala tuai o te kes uma ia le ngangana pe a whaonga nei mele la iai langa lela o le watusi lunga i fitly spoken whaonga tatau le langa le wai sau no mai nei le upu lea o le whaamalosi sa o lea oi o se si upu lea le whaonga e tātou whaapea empower o le whaasamoa le empower o le whaamalosi ia o le whaasamoa fo ina o le tulanga lea o whainga whaamalosi ia tamaitai. So thank you so much, Dr. Michael Lingalinga, for your very informative, very educational piece for today. We thank you so much for joining us today. We realize that you have a busy schedule at BYU. We want to wish you all the best until we meet again, Doctor. Thank you so much.
Hey, no, Rufat, take care. Bye.
Bye, Lava. All right, so we're moving on to our next speaker. We're going to start right now. Our second speaker, Prince John Tupui'au Famuina III, is an individual who is passionate about social injustices such as child abuse and neglect, domestic violence, and gender and racial equality, to advocate for the oppressed and vulnerable populations. John works for the Department of Human and Social Services as a Child Protective Services caseworker in American Samoa. Outside of work, John is an intern for Tautua, a nonprofit organization that provides mental health services and treatment. John wanted to broaden his knowledge, to study and understand the daily interactions of people and their respective settings, such as culture, religion, socioeconomic status, geographical locations, etc. In doing so, he studied and received his bachelor's degree in sociology at New Mexico State University. He is pursuing his master's in social work at the University of New Mexico. As an active community member, John and with John's amazing work, he highlights that the best part about working with the community is receiving gratitude from families and individuals he has assisted as a child protective service caseworker. He states, "Gratification is never expected in this field, but once earned, it further solidifies my position within this profession and tends to fill gaps where my paycheck can't." Morally and ethically, of course. So, ladies and gentlemen, our second speaker for today, Malo Level on side John. Please welcome Prince John Tupui'au Famuina III.
Well, I appreciate that, Judy. And thank you for the introduction. Wasn't really expecting all that, but I do appreciate it. So it's Alaf and good morning, everyone. My name is Prince John Famuina. And first and foremost, I would like to thank the American Samoa Alliance Against Domestic and Sexual Violence for allowing me the opportunity to be among service professionals, community stakeholders, and collaborating partners as we discuss a critical matter that continues to impact individuals, groups, communities, and families, not only within our territory, but globally. This topic is pretty complex and material heavy with so many different elements that we may not be able to fully cover today. Unless you really want to, you can look up some of my other TED Talk episodes on YouTube. I'm just playing. However, I promise to try and keep it as short as possible. Throughout this presentation, we will collectively go over the topic of gender-based violence and its prevalence and existence within our own community and cultural practices. Also, full disclosure, there is a portion within the presentation that is solely based on my individual interpretation and observation on gender-based violence and the influence of current cultural systems that indirectly fosters gender-based violence through the societal acceptance of gender roles and stereotypes. In that portion, extensive research with relative professionals would be appropriate to solidify such a theoretical perspective. The contents within this topic may be triggering for others, so I do understand if you may not want to listen in. I mean, my fiance barely wants to listen to me, so it's all right. The following content is intended for awareness and educational purposes and to open up discussions on matters that have long been overlooked or occasionally cared for when seemingly appropriate. So before we get into it, I'd just like to put this out there, please hold off on any questions, comments, or concerns until the conclusion of the presentation, where then I will try my best to address them accordingly and have an open yet constructive discussions. In this presentation, I will be going over several aspects of gender-based violence, or GBV, as you will hear me say throughout the presentation, by its definition, the different forms of gender-based violence, its appearance within our social interactions and cultural systems based on my individual observation and perspectives, potential causes and consequences of gender-based violence, the role of education and awareness towards decreasing this matter while promoting gender equality, available support services for victims, and potential prevention and intervention approaches. So first off, I quickly wanted to mention the relative framework that I would like for everyone to consider when hearing some of the presented content and how you can use it to view gender-based violence or any sociocultural matter moving forward. This framework, which will be mentioned in later parts, is called intersectionality. Intersectionality is a framework coined by Kimberly Crenshaw that helps to understand the complex ways in which different forms of oppression, such as racism, sexism, homophobia, so on and so forth, how they interact and they tend to overlap. For topical relevancy, it can be applied to examine how gender-based violence is experienced differently by people of diverse identities, including race, ethnicity, religion, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, and gender identity. By using an intersectional approach, we can better empathize with those affected by gender-based violence and gain a deeper understanding of the systemic roots of oppression. Such an understanding can help us to create more effective strategies for addressing GBV and creating a more equitable society. So, starting off, what is gender-based violence? Now, in an effort to raise awareness on such a critical issue, it is important to understand the definition and distinction of gender-based violence. According to the World Health Organization, GBV is any harmful act perpetrated against an individual based on their socially ascribed status, such as gender differences between males and females. This is a critical component to carefully consider regarding the binary framework this definition has, as it can trivialize or downplay the experience of the LGBTQIA plus community with sexual orientation and other individuals who may not align their gender identification as either male or female as victims of gender-based violence. I mentioned this to recognize and acknowledge the unique yet traumatizing experience that victims undergo per their respective social realities and identities. As Audre Lorde mentioned, there is no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives. By this, it is pertinent to recognize that every individual is unique due to differentiating factors such as, what we talked about earlier, their sexual orientation, their gender identification, age, race, ethnicity, economic status, marital status, even religious beliefs or spiritual affiliations, their immigration status, education, and so forth. Again, this highlights the significance of the intersectional framework and how each individual identity comprised into a singular person significantly shapes not just their social realities, but their potential experiences as a victim. As such, with the numerous factors that are unique and specific per individual and or group, we can gradually recognize or generally assume potential stressors, insecurities, and even barriers, whether they be at the micro level or systemic, that heightens a victim's experience, how they may or may not respond to being a victim. All right, so types of gender-based violence. So listed on the slide are some examples of the common forms of GBV with physical violence. This can include anything from minor assaults to severe physical abuse. It involves any form of physical harm, such as hitting, slapping, punching, kicking, or using objects to harm someone. Sexual violence includes any non-consensual sexual acts or behaviors, including rape, sexual assault, abuse, harassment, coercion, and it can happen within intimate or romantic or platonic relationship or in situations involving strangers. Emotional or psychological abuse are tactics such as intimidation, humiliation, degradation, threats, control, manipulation, which all falls under the umbrella of emotional or psychological abuse. It can have severe and lasting emotional, mental, behavioral, physical effects on victims. With verbal abuse, this can include using hurtful words, and it's very common in our language and how we communicate with others, name calling or verbal threats to degrade or control an individual. It can damage that person's self-esteem and emotional well-being in a sense. So this is an important one to highlight due to norms around socially acceptable forms of communication here in American Samoa. Yes, cracking a joke at your friend or family members may seem harmless, but often we can be insensitive to how it impacts that individual's overall well-being and being unaware of the situations they may be in. Again, every situation is different, but recognizing what is playful humor from intentional harm is the aim for prevention. Stalking. Okay, stalking, this involves unwanted, obsessive attention and behaviors directed at an individual, often through surveillance, harassment, or persistent contact. It can cause fear and often emotional distress onto the victims. And yes, if you know your cousin or a friend that is low-key, that fits this description, please report them to the proper agency like their parents or DPS. Financial abuse, when one partner controls the other's financial resources, withholds money, or uses financial means to exert power and control over their partner or the other individual. Yes, We all have that one friend or family member that low-key fits this description, whether they are in a platonic or intimate relationship. And no, I do not control my fiance's account. I simply just borrow some money from her and I pay her back with interest, double the interest for that matter. Next is social isolation. Perpetrators of GBV often isolates their victims from friends, their family, their social networks, support systems. And this isolation can make it more difficult for victims to seek help or escape, the abusive situations. For example, if you know someone, whether friend, stranger, or family member, that tends to instruct their significant other to remain at home or refrain from interacting with their friends or support system, this is that sign. So speak up against these negative behaviors and don't condone them. And lastly, with the expansion of technology and social media, we have cyberbullying and online harassment. In this digital age right now, gender-based violence can extend to online spaces where individuals experience harassment, threats, or the non-consensual distribution of intimate images or information. And we all know at least someone that's been through that situation and how traumatizing that could have been for that person. This is something we have collectively seen become a recent trend, not only within the youth population, but also among adults. It's essential to recognize the various forms of gender-based violence and work towards preventing and addressing them. And it requires a combination of legal measures, education, community support, and changes in cultural norms and attitudes. I hope you guys are still with me and I didn't lost anybody yet. All right, awesome. Okay. So signs of gender-based violence. Okay, so common signs of gender-based violence can vary depending on the specific form of violence. But here are some general indicators to be aware of, such as like physical injuries, emotional distress, isolation, low self-esteem, behavioral changes, control and monitoring, sexual coercion, excessive absence, restricted resource accessibility, threats, intimidation, appearing anxious, and potentially just substance abuse. Physical injuries can be an indication of physical violence, especially if they are visible signs of physical harm like bruises, cuts, broken bones, or unexplained injuries. Sometimes such injuries may be attributed to accidents or, the person may be clumsy, but when in reality, they result from the abuse. With emotional distress, victims of GBV often exhibit signs of emotional distress such as depression, anxiety, fear, or withdrawal symptoms. They may become unusually quiet, reserved, or seem constantly on edge. When you recognize these symptoms, reaching out and just being present for that individual will go a long way. With isolation, as mentioned in the previous slide, perpetrators tend to isolate their victims from their families and the support system. And, they may control the victim's interaction and monitor their communication. So this can appear when an individual controls the victim's social media accounts or become excessively aggressive or controlling when victims interact with other people. With low self-esteem, victims may have a diminished sense of self-worth due to being emotionally abused or just receiving constant criticism. They may express self-doubt, self-blame, or feeling of guilt, which further discourages the victim from seeking services or opposing their perpetrators. With changes in behavior, sudden or noticeable changes in that person's behavior, such as, for example, if they were once, an outgoing person becoming introverted or typically a calm individual, becoming agitated, those can be some of the signs. With control and monitoring, perpetrators may exhibit controlling behaviors such as tracking the victim's movements. Even with the iPhones today, we have like those, find my iPhone or family, location sharing and such, controlling their finances or making decisions on their behalf without their consent. Sexual coercion. This includes a lack of consent during sexual activities, fear or avoidance of sexual encounters, or unexplained sexually transmitted infections. Excessive absence. Victims may often defer from participating in any social gathering or interactions with others. Again, these signs or indicators may be better explained by other relative matters, but again, it's still a potential sign within this particular topic. With restricted access to resources, victims may have limited access to, getting money, transportation, or important documents such as like their government IDs, passports, driver's license, so on and so forth, due to financial control or restrictions imposed on by their abuser. With threats and intimidation, victims may speak threats against them or their loved ones. or they may exhibit visible signs of fear when their abuser is mentioned. Anxiety, this person or victim may appear constantly anxious, fearful, on edge in the absence of the abuser. This can be a result of trauma or ongoing threats. Finally, we have substance abuse. Victims may turn to alcohol or drugs as a way to cope within the abuse they are experiencing. With the negative stigma, as in the negative ways that we look at individuals who utilizes, controlled substances, society tends to negatively respond to that, not knowing that they could be potentially a victim of domestic violence or gender-based violence when utilizing those controlled substances. As such, substance abuse may overshadow the initial and primary issue of being a victim of trauma and violence. It's important to remember that signs of GBV can be subtle, and victims may be hesitant to disclose their experiences due to either being fearful, shamed, or other factors. If you suspect someone is experiencing gender-based violence, approach the situation with sensitivity and offer support. Recognizing these indicators of gender-based violence can help to provide victims with the safety and support they need. By understanding these signs, people can offer emotional and practical support to victims, as well as help them access services and resources to protect themselves and heal from the trauma of abuse. If someone is exhibiting signs of gender-based violence, it is important to listen without judgment, be supportive, and encourage them to seek help from professionals who specializes in assisting victims of GBV. Okay, guys, I know that last one was pretty heavy, but we're getting there. We're getting there. Now, with the impact of gender-based violence on families and individuals, so GBV has profound and far-reaching impacts on victims, their families, children, and communities. These effects can be physical, emotional, social, and even economic, and they persist long after, the trauma and violence has occurred. With impact on victims of GBV often suffers from physical injuries, ranging from bruises to cuts, and even more severe harm. They may require medical attention. And sorry about that, guys. In extreme cases, experience long-term health consequences. GBV can cause severe emotional distress, including anxiety, depression, PTSD, and low self-esteem. And oftentimes survivors grapple with feelings of shame, guilt, and fear. So with impacts on the families, witnessing gender-based violence or being aware of it within the family can be emotionally distressing for family members. They may experience feeling of loneliness, guilt, anger, so on and so forth. This can disrupt family relationships, leading to conflicts and breakdowns in communication. And in some cases, it can dissolve the family system. With impact on children exposed to gender-based violence, even if they're not direct victims, can suffer from psychological trauma. Witnessing violence in the home can lead to anxiety, depression, and behavioral issues. Children may struggle with their social and emotional development, affecting their ability to form healthy relationships in the future, and can increase things like being absent from schools and poor academic performance. And as children may be preoccupied with the violence at home, which further increases their risk of adverse childhood experiences. With communities, this issue can perpetuate harmful gender norms and attitudes in communities, contributing to a culture of acceptance of violence against, victims and marginalized gender groups. Communities can suffer economically as a result of GBV due to decreased productivity, increased healthcare costs, and the diversion of resources to address the consequences of violence. So efforts to address this and its impact on victims, their families, their children, and the community collectively are essential. This includes providing support and services for victims, raising awareness, legal measures, community-based programs to prevent violence, and promote gender equality. The aim is to help victims heal and change the societal norms and structures that allow gender-based violence to continuously persist. All right. So cultural influence. Now, with gender-based violence and cultural influence, what I'm prepared to share is solely opinion-based or an individual observation. My observation and opinion do not reflect the position of my professional setting or standing, but rather an observation of how gender-based violence is prevalent within our community and our culture. The prevalence of gender-based violence can vary from one culture and community to another, and it is essential to note that cultural contexts are diverse and complex. In Samoa, like in many other societies, gender-based violence exists to some extent. The first thing I would like to note is that there are no specific areas within Samoan culture that visibly suggest or support gender-based violence. However, there are deep-rooted unconscious behaviors and thoughts at the micro-individual levels to macro governance level within the cultural systems and practices interconnecting with religious beliefs and gender roles that indirectly influence gender-based violence. I'd also like to mention and consider the historical timeframes in which our culture has evolved since its inception. Cultural practices then till now have significantly shifted, so there is a potential skew within this observation. Now, there are different ways one can argue that our cultural values and practices may or may not indirectly support gender-based violence. However, for the sake of time, I'll go over one in which our cultural values and system enforces gender roles and norms, indirectly leading to GBV. Again, this is merely opinion-based and not intended to offend or disrespect cultural beliefs. Additionally, this point is not on my own, but was shared during a group discussion, and I wanted to elaborate a little bit more on it. One particular example is the hierarchy of the Matai system. The traditional Samoan Matai system is indeed male-dominated, and it is shaped by specific gender norms and cultural practices. While the Matai system has significant cultural and historical importance, it can indirectly support or reinforce gender-based violence in several ways through gender roles and stereotypes. The Matai system often reinforces traditional gender roles, with men typically holding the position of authority and leadership. This can perpetuate the belief that men should be in control and women should be subservient, contributing to unequal power dynamics. Second is the control over resources. Matais often have authority over communal lands and resources. This control can be used to manipulate or control the economic well-being of family members, particularly women, making them vulnerable to economic abuse and exploitations. Furthermore, Samoan culture places a significant emphasis on family and community unity. Reporting instances of gender-based violence within the family can be stigmatized, as it may be seen as bringing shame to the family or village. This stigma can deter, survivors from seeking help or reporting abuse. Another aspect is limited female representation. The traditional Matai system typically lacks female representation. When women are excluded from leadership and decision-making roles, their voices and concerns are often not adequately, represented and or addressed, perpetuating their vulnerability. It's important to note that while these aspects of the Matai system can indirectly support gender-based violence, not all families or all villages in Samoa adhere strictly to these norms, and there are ongoing efforts to challenge and change these dynamics. Again, not all families or not all Matais practices or enforces these gender norms and roles that we had just discussed. So just putting that out there because I don't want nobody to be like, oh, well, my dad isn't like that. I'm not saying everybody, but I am just saying it's a general consensus. Next one, we have education and awareness. So education and awareness plays a crucial role in addressing and combating gender-based violence through empowerment, prevention, early intervention, reducing stigmas, fostering a supportive community and environment, legal advocacy, empathetic comprehension, supporting healthy relationships, promoting gender equality and social change. With empowerment, education and awareness program helps individuals understand their rights and recognizes when they are experiencing or witnessing gender-based violence. This knowledge empowers them to take action, seek help, and stand up against violence. With prevention, I'm all for educating people about the root causes of gender-based violence and the importance of gender equality is key to preventing this matter. It helps challenge and change societal norms and attitudes that contribute to this violence. Early intervention teaches individuals to identify early warning signs, a GBV, allowing them to intervene before the situation escalates. And this can prevent further harm and potentially save a life. With reduced stigma, education and awareness reduces the stigma associated with being a victim of gender-based violence. When society is better informed, victims are more likely to seek help without fear or judgment. And legal advocacy, education can inform people about their legal rights and the avenues available for seeking justices in cases of gender-based violence. This knowledge can lead to more survivors reporting incidents and holding perpetrators accountable. This particular process actually occurs here at the Department of Human and Social Services with the Adult Protective Services, or APS for short, and other organizations, such as like with Mona Uli, who is one of the well-known advocates for victims of domestic violence and sexual violence. Through empathy and understanding, awareness fosters empathy and understanding towards victims of gender-based violence. It encourages individuals to listen to survivors, offer their support, and refrain from victim blaming. With healthy relationships, education can promote healthy relationship dynamics and consent, teaching individuals the importance of mutual respect, communication, boundaries, and it plays a vital role in promoting gender equality, challenging those stereotypes, and dismantling this patriarchal attitude that often underpins gender-based violence. When people understand the value of gender equity, they are less likely to tolerate or perpetuate or perpetrate violence. Widespread education and awareness can lead to broader societal change. As more people become advocates for gender equality and against gender-based violence, it exerts pressure on governments, institutions, policymakers to implement laws and policies to address and prevent gender-based violence. All right, guys, so we're almost there, I promise this time. So in order to prevent and intervene in gender-based violence, a comprehensive and holistic approach is required. This approach should involve individuals, communities, institutions, and policymakers. Prevention efforts can be made through various means, such as, what we talked about with educational programs. Education programs should be implemented in schools, communities that educate and inform people about healthy relationships, consent, and gender equality. They should also aim to raise awareness about the root causes of gender-based violence and challenge those harmful gender stereotypes and norms. Empowerment is key to prevent gender-based violence. It is important to empower individuals, especially women and marginalized groups, to know their rights and build self-esteem, confidence, and promote economic empowerment, access to education, and leadership opportunities for women and marginalized communities. Community engagement is crucial, and we must mobilize communities to speak out against GBV. Engaging community leaders and influencers to advocate for change is also important. Media and public awareness campaigns can play a significant role in preventing gender-based violence. We should develop and promote media campaigns that challenge harmful portrayals of gender in the media. It is also important to promote awareness campaigns about gender-based violence and available resources for support for the victims and their families. Workplace initiatives can help prevent GBV, encouraging workplaces to implement policies and training programs that addresses gender-based violence, provide support for survivors, and prevent harassment in the workplace, which is, again, very necessary. Engaging young people in discussions about gender equality and healthy relationship is crucial. Supporting youth-led initiatives that addresses GBV and promote positive changes is equally essential. Intervention is also very important. We must ensure the availability of comprehensive support services, including hotlines, shelters, counseling, legal aid, and healthcare, which again, we have those in place, and we're making those much needed improvements to getting those services out there for victims and their families. Another important part with service delivery is training for service providers such as healthcare professionals, law enforcement, social workers, which is necessary to recognize and respond to gender-based violence appropriately. Establishing and promoting accessible promoting training for service providers is very critical, not only with building that rapport with agencies and the communities, but addressing that need. We should also support survivors in seeking legal protection, as mentioned, restraining orders and justice through the legal system. Advocating for the rights of survivors in the legal process is crucial. Encouraging community members to report and intervene when they witness gender-based violence, and ensuring access to mental health and trauma support for survivors to help them cope with the emotional and psychological effects of GBV is also on top of there as well. And preventing and intervening in gender-based violence, it's very multifaceted. Effort is being made that requires collaboration at all levels of society. It's essential to engage individuals, communities, organizations, and governments who work together to address this pervasive issue and create a world free from GBV. All right, guys, we're about to be there. All right, so it is crucial to acknowledge the available resources for victims of gender-based violence. In American Samoa, there are several organizations that are dedicated to providing support and services to those affected by gender-based violence, such as the ones listed on the slide. I do apologize if I may have forgotten to list your agency. There are government department as well who may not be tailored specifically to gender-based violence or domestic violence, but operate and provide a particular service within those matters, such as the Attorney General's office, who prosecutes these matters, as Council Drummond had shared earlier. So I'm not going to go into any details, as I'm assuming we all should know the available resources on island. And if you do not know, please let me know, and we can have a sidebar, and I can provide any relative information for any of the resource centers. These resources are essential in helping victims of gender-based violence to heal, recover, and rebuild their lives. It takes a collective effort to address gender-based violence, and these organizations are dedicated and they deserve recognition and applause for their work. Their commitment to providing critical services and support to those affected by gender-based violence is admirable, and they play a crucial role in promoting awareness and prevention of GBV and domestic violence in our community. It is important to continue supporting these organizations and their efforts to end or reduce gender-based violence and create a safer and more equitable society. Now, I promise this is the last slide. So the call to action. Gender-based violence affects us all, and it's time to speak out and make a change. This year's theme, Everyone Knows Someone, reminds us that behind every statistic and news headline, there's a real person, a friend, a family member, or a colleague who has faced the devastating impact of gender-based violence. Let's be the change makers, the advocates, and the allies who refuse to turn a blind eye. Together, we can break the cycle, support survivors, and foster a community where every person can live free from fear and violence. Our collective action and unwavering commitment can bring about a future where everyone knows someone who helped make a difference, one step at a time. Thank you again for being patient with me throughout this presentation. Apologies if any of the content may have been triggering or upsetting to anyone. And thank you for coming to my TED Talk, which is proudly sponsored by Alliance and GSC Read. I'm just kidding. So now I'm just going to give out to anyone for questions, comments, and concerns. And in case there isn't, I'm just going to turn the time back to Judy. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you so much. I'm just checking on Facebook. That's live streaming. Great presentation. Those are some of the comments that are on Facebook. Great presentation. Awesome job, John. That was awesome, Prince. I love the visuals. We also have another comment here. Thank you, Prince. If your fiance doesn't listen, get another fiance.
No. My fiance, listen, full disclosure, guys, my fiance was also the one that put together my slide. I had to wake up early in the morning at 4 a.m. and be like, babe,
we love you, Leslie. Great presentation, John. Very informative. Thank you, Prince. What else do we have here? Yes. Honorable John, thank you for your presentation. I was going to ask, I did have a question about gender-based violence and what it looked like in our Samoa or our culture or so forth, but then you covered that. You came back with that slide and you covered everything there. Thank you, John. Manu Lava, very informative. On social media, great presentation. Yeah, looks like you did an awesome presentation that you covered gender-based violence. That we don't have any questions. Everyone is just at all with the presentation.
I'm really hoping that's the case. I'm really hoping that's the case, and they're just not like, nah, get this guy off the screen already.
No. No. We just wanted to, I wanted to also say that, mention that, I know we had mentioned before that John also does intern with Tautua, which is one of the partners of the Alliance, and also another nonprofit organization here in American Samoa that provides mental health services for the community and so forth. So if anyone hasn't seen John around, you'll be seeing him around a lot. With everything that's going on, that's happening in the community, you'll see John out there. John's also seen with Paulia at DHSS. That's the gang over there, under the guidance and leadership of Director Mwalva Fatasi John Sui Sala. And so we want to thank also the team over there. We know Paulia's on here today with us. And we want to thank John and the gang over there at DHSS, Paulia, the director, for doing awesome stuff over there. You guys are really out there, and you guys are really pushing these services. And so if anyone has any questions about, because DHSS provides a lot of these services that John's part of, Child Protective Services, and if you have any questions, please feel free to ask John here if you wish, and or you can call us later, and we will be more than happy to refer you or refer any of your questions, any information to John, who can provide some of that information for you. Let me just check one more time. All right. Okay, so we have a question, John. Who would be considered as the genders here in American Samoa? Who would be considered as the genders here in American Samoa? Somebody had asked that. They're also not sure whether you might have mentioned it and they might have missed it.
Gotcha. I'm not really too sure. I'm not really too sure about the question and if there's like more context behind it. Again, I'm not a professional when it comes to like gender identity and all those. Those are still areas that I'm still kind of like learning and going through. So I don't want to give an answer and offend anybody. So I'm just gonna leave it at that. But a gender identity, again, with like the recent trend in the US and globally, and the arguments made that there's more than two genders. And again, I mentioned throughout the presentation that it's a binary framework, which it's only acknowledging male and female. However, because of that framework, it kind of like downplays and trivializes the experiences of individuals that doesn't necessarily fit within that framework, to identify whether to be a male or female. And then with individuals who orients himself in a different sexual manner, for example, like individuals in the LGBTQIA plus community and their experiences as well. So like, I can't say if there are any individuals here in American Samoa that genderly identify their gender outside of the binary framework. But I'm just going to leave it at that because I don't want to speak on a topic that I'm not really fully informed on.
Okay. No, you're good. All right. So we also have another question. What are ways to safety plan for victims of domestic violence in American Samoa? Are there resources, especially if they're too afraid to make the first move? I think this question is referring to whatever resources that DHS might have available, or what are ways to safety plan for victims of domestic violence in American Samoa? Are there resources, especially if they're too afraid to make the first move or to report or so?
No, definitely. I mean, there are a lot of different local resources on island, which I had shared on the earlier slide. So I'm not sure if a lot of the individuals who are participating in today's events may be aware, but and I know a lot of our collaborating partners are aware. I know that Mona Uli had just recently opened up Jessica's Place, and they also provide services specifically for victims of domestic violence and sexual violence. Also here at the Department of Human and Social Services, we have our Adult Protective Services Unit, or VOCA, or APS for short. And they also kind of help the clients in building that rapport and going through the entire process, not only through the legal works, and then addressing the various concerns that are assessed upon the initial contact.
Okay. Well, we have here Paulia, who's also tuning in, and also wanted to add on, they can either call us directly or walk into any of our partners, the Alliance Coalition, LBJ, Jessica's Place, as John had mentioned, and be referred to us for services. So they can either email if they have access to an email as well. So if you have access to any of the emails, like anybody at DHSS, like Bobia or John, you can email. They can reach out on Facebook page and message them. You can. DHSS also has a Facebook page. Yes, reach out to the Facebook page. Maybe not John's TikTok page, but their Facebook page. Yeah. So there's John did provide that that last slide where he had a list of resources with the partners. And like John had mentioned, that wasn't everyone. There are also some that that weren't on the list, like Catholic Social Services.
Yeah.
We have the American Samoa Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence. We also have Pai Maleauli, where we have advocates like Ipu Lefiti and some other ladies there at Pai Maleauli who are also support victims of violence. They can also call our crisis line. This is from Paulia as well. The crisis line at DHSS 699-4211. They can also call DHSS crisis line at 699-4211, which is a 24-hour hotline, and can ask for help or refer someone who is in need of help due to victimization. So there's a lot of that information here that Paulia has been able to, both Paulia and John have been able to provide us.
Also, just putting this out there too, Judy. Sorry.
Go ahead.
DHSS, specifically APS. We also have a shelter for victims of domestic violence. So, like, just putting that out there for the public that DHSS does have a shelter in place if needed be.
Okay, so you heard John. There's a shelter. I know a lot of people out there have been asking about the shelter. A lot of people have been saying, the shelter is full. Well, if you're not sure about it, if you're not sure about those information, it's always better to call DHSS to confirm that information. We wouldn't want anyone that's in need of coming to the shelter that needs to be in the shelter not come just because they thought or somebody else told them that the shelter is full. You need to confirm that information because most likely, if the shelter is full, people won't just be left out, in nowhere. DHSS will be there to support you. Thank you, Thank you for responding so quickly with all these helpful resources. You're most welcome, Maria. So, and if anybody else needs those information, they're right there about the resources that's available. If you're not able to, if you didn't get all of that information, you can connect with us later, and we'll be more than happy to provide you with that information. I'm not seeing any other questions or comment. So at this time, we want to thank John for presenting. John, thank you for that informative and educational presentation on gender-based violence. We will stay connected. And thank you again for everything you do for the community and in support of people, of victims of violence within our community.
I appreciate
John.
I appreciate that, Judy. Thank you. And thank you guys again for sponsoring my TED Talk. Hope you guys have a good day. Take care.
Thank you. Take care.